Welcome back to the Tech Startup Network podcast. Joining me today is Andrew Rush, the president and CEO of Starcatcher, a pioneering company advancing the development of the world's first space-based energy grid. A seasoned space industry executive, Andrew is widely recognized for scaling groundbreaking ventures and driving transformational growth across the commercial and defense space sectors. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'd love to start off by having you share more about who you are and what you're building at Starcatcher.
Andrew Rush, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Starcatcher. Starcatcher is actually the third space company that I've had the pleasure of building or scaling. The first company was called Made in Space, which did exactly what the name said it did. We were the first company to manufacture functional objects off the face of the planet. The second company after that was a company called Redwire, which is a diversified space subsystems manufacturer, which we built into the largest independent provider of space solar arrays in the United States. We also did a lot of other kind of pieces of satellites, including building cameras for satellites. And one of the kind of the cooler moments there is that all the images you saw from Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 were taken with cameras that my teams built at Redwire when I was there. Of course, we took Redwire public a couple years after it was founded. And then I started Starcatcher with my two co-founders about 2 years ago to address what I believe is the core bottleneck for space operations after launch availability, which is power availability. Every satellite lives within swap constraints, size, weight, and power. The reusable launch vehicles that SpaceX and Rocket Lab and other folks have been building have really opened up the aperture on the size and weight part of the equation. But power is still super constrained because we essentially operate in almost like a pre-industrial world in space from a power consumption perspective, where everybody has to bring their own power generation with them. So, it's not quite water wheels driving factories, in space, but we use solar arrays, and when you see the sun, you get power, and when you don't, you just live off of batteries. And this is in stark contrast with how we do industrial buildup on the planet, which is that we rely on infrastructure for power provisioning, for power distribution, which enables folks to stay focused on their core mission, their core product and service, rather than having to go build all these other pieces. That's why at Starcatcher, we're building the world's first power grid for space to give satellites more power, higher concentrations of power, and power eclipse by beaming energy to their existing solar arrays. So that's kind of the overview of who I am and Starcatcher.
Incredible. I was really interested in Starcatcher because of the fact that you're the first company to be doing this. And so I'm curious to hear what that has been like being the world's first space-based energy grid. If there's like pressures that you've come across doing that or anything like that you can talk about.
Yeah, we're definitely a sector defining company. Before we really went hard at this, power beaming was something that people thought primarily of in almost like the Arthur C. Clarke, science fiction writer vision of beaming energy from far out in space down to the planet's surface to, create sort of a post-carbon, power abundance world. And, I grew up on this steady diet of science fiction, and love that vision. But I don't think that it's really an achievable vision right now. And the market and the regulatory issues that exist there are pretty significant. But the fact on the ground today is that we have like 10,000 plus satellites in low Earth orbit that all face this common power constraint, that all are, want to do more to meet the moment that we live in. And that geographic concentration plus, plus a common need for more power lends itself really well to a shared infrastructure solution. And there were some technological, hurdles that have been cleared that also underpin like this, building a space-to-space power beaming grid, being a now opportunity, not a 5 years from now or 10 years kind of opportunity. And so really kind of pulling all those things together, and then doing a lot of technological validation, a lot of customer, education and customer validation was how we've gone from a standing start to where we are today and where we will be in the future.
Definitely. Yeah. And as you mentioned, I mean, there's a critical need because so many things that we rely on down here on the ground come from satellites in space. And so being able to make sure that they have the power that they need to keep things grounded and secure here is so important.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Like it is a foundational fact that
Mhm.
space enables our daily lives, right? From GPS signals to help our Ubers get where we need to go, from uh, precision navigation and timing signals that underpin global banking, to Earth observation, taking images that again support our understanding of our planet, supporting national security and global security needs, and increasingly, direct to device telecommunications.
Mhm.
That your cell phone towers are no longer exclusively towers that that are in your metropolitan or rural area. We have cell phone towers flying overhead at orbital velocities,
Yeah.
and that's really expanding and expanding. And looking a little bit further out, we're going to be doing data processing in space in very real ways that are impactful and useful and integral to our personal daily lives as well as our professional daily lives. And we're also going to see manufacturing and research really scale in space, taking advantage of the fact that when you take gravity out of the manufacturing equation, out of the research equation, you get really interesting results.
Hmm. Absolutely. And one thing that I think is really cool about Starcatcher as well is like the dual use between both commercial and defense. And so I'm curious how you've been able to build for both audiences and customer bases.
Yeah. So two sectors in the space economy: commercial space customers and the national security customers. And space has for decades lived with a sort of symbiotic relationship between those two customers. Innovations in one area get adopted in the other, and vice versa. And space, of course, in the United States in particular, is a huge differentiator for our national security apparatus. The creation of the Space Force was an explicit recognition of that. And so, this is my third space company that I have built or scaled, and it's my deep belief that you must serve both of those verticals, both of those sectors in the space community, because of that, positive feedback loop that exists between the two of them. It expands your market opportunity, and it also protects against, boom bust cycles in either vertical. I've seen where commercial space is rocking and rolling, and national security defense space is really, going to crawl, and vice versa. And so it helps to drive forward with customers in both those areas, to keep your business on a positive trajectory, regardless of what's going on in the macro. Um, and really there's also a significant amount of crossover there. So understanding the rhythms of those customers, understanding what appeals to a commercial space operator versus what appeals to a national security space operator, is important. And then you just staff and drive at it.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned a few times now just getting that validation from your customers, being able to talk with them, do market research, things like that. And so I'd love to hear how you've implemented that and incorporated that into your work.
Yeah, the this company has the most ambitious vision of the companies that I've had the pleasure of being a part of from a space sector perspective, or really any company I've had the pleasure of being a part of, right? Like we want to make it as easy for people to operate in space as it is for people to operate on the ground. And we think that core infrastructure is the way to enable that. And so from the moment we conceived of the architecture that we have been implementing, we have had very close dialogue with customers.
Mhm.
The first thing I did actually as we were developing this was just call a bunch of my friends and colleagues in the space sector and say, "Hey, like I have this idea. What do you think? Like here are use cases I think apply to you. Here's the challenges I see. Would you use this? What do you think?" And it was really validating in those very early days that almost to a person, everybody was like, "Andrew, that's really cool. And here are other use cases you should think about."
Mm.
So that sort of early customer pull of like, hey, not only this, but also that was really meaningful. And then we've capitalized on it and extended that by saying, hey, here's we've put in place letters of intent with over 40 companies. We've signed power purchase agreements with 7 companies now. And we've also had quite significant traction with our national security space colleagues in getting multiple contracts put in place. So really staying close with the customer, consistently educating them about the architecture, what it looks like, how it can be used, how it's evolving, and really having that customer focus of, at least for us, making it as easy as possible for them to
Mhm.
adopt it. Right? We're not saying, hey, throw out the satellite design handbook. Our energy is compatible with existing solar arrays, with existing chemistries, with existing architectures, so that we're, backward compatible, and
Mhm.
people don't have to change the design of their spacecraft, change the way they're operating in space to get power from us. And that's both that staying really close with the customer, as well as trying to make it as frictionless as possible for them to use the new technology, is really, I think, how, why we've had success.
I love that. And I think that's a huge case of like why, like you said, you've been so successful is because it's almost like a drop-in solution where, as you mentioned, these companies don't have to change their what they already have for their product. Like they're able to just get going already. And so I'd love to hear more about that, how you've made that process seamless and
Yeah.
frictionless more.
So with a lot of space-based servicing technologies, you run into kind of a chicken and the egg problem. So a
Hmm.
lot of our colleagues in the satellite refueling world run into this chicken and the egg problem, where they say, "Hey, buy my gas cap and I'll refuel you in space." And then the customers say, "Well, why would I waste money and mass on your gas cap when you don't have gas stations built?"
Yeah.
And so then that makes it kind of a hard to get going kind of thing. And so we really looked at that and said, hey, we want to avoid that issue. And how can we do that? And the way that we do that is that we transmit. We're doing power beaming by sending columns of light from our power node satellites to many customer satellites simultaneously. And those power beams, are, column of light, 1.5 meters across. So about enough to cover, one part of a solar array. And they are made up of visible and near infrared light,
Hmm.
multiple wavelengths of light, in fact. And the reason that we use those wavelengths, is those are the wavelengths that solar arrays are highly compatible at converting into energy for their satellites. Outside of those wavelengths, if you were to transmit like the deep infrared, for instance, the satellite solar arrays are 0% efficient. They're extremely inefficient at converting those photons into power. So if you sent that, you would just be, giving them a bunch of like waste heat, which is not particularly useful.
Hmm.
And so in that way, by transmitting those wavelengths, we are more efficient. We're less thermally, we put less of a thermal load on the client spacecraft, which is really important in space. Um, and they don't have to retrofit. We're just like basically a better sun for them. And we also take advantage of the fact that a solar array, just inherently, if you put a higher intensity of light on it, it will generate more power in a roughly linear fashion.
Hmm.
So you can go 5x, you can go 10x and get a solar panel to produce 5 to 10x more power per square meter than what you would otherwise produce. So we can put multiple beams on them and get them up to those higher levels. And so in that way, we are backward compatible. And we also, can be optimized. People can optimize for us and produce a lot more power, per pound of
Hmm.
spacecraft that they field.
Oh, incredible. I'm curious if you have any like customer case studies or success stories that you're able to share from using your product.
Yeah. So where we are today is that we have completed a series of ground demonstrations and our
Mm.
first in-space demonstration to demonstrate and validate the technology stack. The next step for us is to take a very crawl, walk, run approach to provisioning and operationalizing, to proving, excuse me, and operationalizing our technology, but doing that in the space environment.
Hmm.
So we have our first satellite that's actually built and on the path to flight, and then we'll follow that up with a more operational bird thereafter. Um, of note, in one of our ground demonstrations, we went down to Cape Canaveral and we beamed energy down the runway that they used to land the space shuttle on. And we actually beat the DARPA world record for optical power beaming,
Wow.
delivering over a kilowatt of energy to just off-the-shelf solar arrays. And we've had customers actually bring hardware and get powered off of those solar arrays. So we had folks bringing like orbital data center payloads, remote sensing payloads. We even had a company bring a lunar rover prototype that we beamed energy at.
Hmm.
So really, all kinds of different customers are impacted and enhanced by what we are doing.
That's amazing. And I love that you mentioned that crawl, walk, run approach because I feel like, especially with a company like yours that's industry defining and pioneering, I imagine that's built a lot of trust in your potential customers by knowing that you're taking those phased or staged approaches to building your product.
Absolutely. That crawl, walk, run approach, I think is critical to our success,
Mhm.
and critical to the velocity in which we have been able to grow. In fact, it's kind of a slow is smooth, smooth is fast kind of approach, because we have this grand vision, and the simplest approach would be to say, well, just give us like $2 billion in like 6 years, and we'll show up with something really amazing in space. But I don't have the investor the capital formation prowess to pull that off. And so we take our customers and we take the capital markets as they are,
Mhm.
and say, hey, here's proof points that we can show that increase investor confidence, and increase customer interest and adoption, and decrease technical risk,
Mhm.
and show along the way, hey, we can do these ground demonstrations, we can do this in-space demonstration, we can get these contracts or that contracts or these PPAs or those letters of intent. And then that just creates this flywheel that keeps us very customer focused, and a lot, and keeps us growing.
Totally. And I've interviewed a handful of founders on the show who have all said that having to pivot with their product has actually been so much more common than not having to pivot. It's almost like they've been
Hmm.
expected to have to pivot at some point. And so I'm curious to hear if you found that to be true for Starcatcher. If there was a point in time with building out the product, if you
Yeah.
realized you had to change gears.
I think the very early conversations that we had, where we were saying, hey, this is the architecture that we envision. Here's how it's utilized. Here's how we think you could use it. Here's how we think other people can use it. And then having that early customer conversation where folks say yes, and uh,
Mm.
really, really solidified the go-to-market foundation of Starcatcher. Um, and let us shine some light on other uses of power beaming in space, that we were aware of and driving at from the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, so we've been fortunate through that diligence to not have a dramatic pivot.
Yeah, which is great. And as someone who is so ingrained within the space industry, having done this at previous companies before, I'm curious to hear why you think the space economy is booming right now and why there's so much attention on it.
So I think a lot about the meme on the internet of people saying what instant success looks like publicly, and then there's the whole rest of like a mountain underneath it that's like what instant success actually is.
Yeah.
And this moment that we're in right now is extraordinarily amazing and is extraordinarily validating as people in the space sector. Because I think especially with the recent SpaceX IPO, we're in the same era that tech was in when after Google went public.
Mhm.
That this isn't just, hey, the markets have woken up and this is kind of interesting. This is like, no, this is bedrock, and there's a bunch of stuff that we're going to build on top of it, and we're going to have the capital and the customer interest to do so. But it's really a culmination of the last 10 or 15 years and more of a transition from space being a primarily government and space exploration driven endeavor to now primarily a commercial uh, uh, enterprise driven endeavor. And of
Mhm.
course, we're super, super pumped and committed to supporting the national security needs, to supporting space exploration needs and ambitions of our nation and of our planet. But we're in a world where more and more of that what you think of as the core space apparatus is commercially provided service, right?
Mhm.
When I was when I was in school, the space shuttle was like the symbol of the space of space. And it was a government designed and owned rocket. And now the rockets that take 90% of the stuff to space from the United States is a privately owned and is a private company.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that sea change has taken a long time, and now we're seeing that now we're experiencing the early scaled delivery of value, but it's really just the beginning, right? Direct to cell connectivity is here and scaling and is enormous. Data processing in space is coming and is going to be enormous. Manufacturing in space is coming and is going to be enormous. And all of those things are enabled and enhanced by having more infrastructure. Launch is infrastructure, telecommunications is infrastructure, and power, like what we're building at Starcatcher, is core infrastructure that it enables this future.
Absolutely. And so, with that being said, I would love to hear what's next on Starcatcher's radar, especially with your recent fundraise, what plans you have coming up and anything you're able to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very much, pushing the throttle forward. We closed a Series A of $65 million, which is co-led by B Capital, Shield Capital, and Cerberus. Really, really great and amazing partners to have. General J. Raymond joined our board, who is kind of the founding general of the Space Force. And so some really, really talented folks. And we've also been growing the team. We're over 40 folks now. Would love to get to nearly double that as quickly as we can. So really in all flavors of engineer and technician, but not only engineers and technicians, but also the business development, marketing, communications folks, business operations folks. Because space is a team sport, it takes all kinds to make it be successful. And in terms of the next things for us, really it is that crawl, walk, run, going from going from demonstration to operationalization in space that is next for us. We have our first satellite that's at a very high maturity level, getting ready to fly. We'll be talking about that more as we get closer to launch, and then a second satellite to operationalize the technology thereafter. While we just continue to build a backlog and deepen our relationships with commercial space customers and the national security space customers.
Exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing and following along as you guys achieve those milestones. And one question I have for you is that for anyone who's listening to this episode who is a space founder themselves, I'd love to hear advice you'd give them as someone who has gone through this a few times before.
I think if you're a space founder and you're listening to this, and you're looking for just kind of broadly applicable advice, I think what I would say is maybe twofold. One is this is a business where you must be persistent. Because it's been around for a decent chunk of time, a lot of the customers kind of wait and see if you will stick around. And I experienced this at Made in Space. Like, there were folks in the human spaceflight program. The first time I went and talked to them, they basically were like, who are you? Why do I care?" And then, but a couple of years later, some of those folks were our greatest advocates
Mhm.
because we showed up and we just kept educating. And I've had the exact same experience at Starcatcher with commercial and government folks. So it's not like it wasn't like the different era. That's just the rhythm of behavior. The other piece that I would encourage folks to lean into, but not exclusively focus on, is uh, the government as a research and development partner. Things like CRADAs, things like Space Act agreements, things like the SBIR program are all really amazing tools um, that can help you accelerate your technology, but more importantly, your customer relationships.
Mhm.
Because the government's kind of go-to-market rhythm is more like, we'll give you a little bit of money and we'll do some study together and understand it and then grow from there. And despite that, we have all this wonderful defense tech money that's coming in, and that has allowed everybody more room to run and experiment. But the rhythms are still the same fundamental rhythms, in my view. So leaning
Mhm.
into those things and leveraging them as much as you can, has always worked out.
Great advice. I love that. And now, as we get ready to close out this episode, one of my favorite questions to ask our guests is to give a shout out to someone in tech that they really admire right now. So it could be a fellow founder, VC, consultant, whoever you've been inspired by lately.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Um, one of the folks that I historically have been very, very impressed with and called out was a gentleman named Tory Bruno, who for many, many years ran a company called ULA, one of the larger space launch companies. And Tory has recently gone over to Blue Origin now, and that's really exciting because when Tori was at ULA, it was a very focused organization because of the corporate parents that owned ULA. But obviously, Blue has just a lot of room to run, and a lot of resource. So I'm excited to. I've always been impressed with Tori's abilities, and I'm really impressed with what has been going on there that clearly has his fingerprints on it.
Love that. Andrew, this has been such a good episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to share the many exciting things happening at Starcatcher. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to learn more.
Absolutely. So you can find us at our website, star-catcher.com, star-catcher.com/careers if you're interested in being a part of the journey with us. And then of course you can find us on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram.
Amazing. And I'll include those places in the show notes for listeners to easily find you. Thank you so much again for coming on today's show.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.